Hey everyone, welcome to Life Reflections. Today I'm sharing a life story that might just hit home for you. If you enjoy it, give it a thumbs up, drop a comment with your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button to join me for more moments that matter. Let's dive in.
I never thought I'd see him again, let alone in a place like this. It had been 17 long years since Gabriel had walked out of my life. 17 years since he turned his back on me, all because of something I couldn't control, something that I never wished on myself, the inability to have children. He walked away, believing that my body had failed me, that it had failed us both. He didn't know what to do with me, so he made the choice for both of us, and just like that, he was gone. The man who promised to stand by me through thick and thin had disappeared as soon as my body couldn't give him the one thing he wanted the most, a child of his own. I didn't want to believe it. I fought with every ounce of my being to hold on to hope that he would see beyond the surface, that he would understand it wasn't my fault. But in the end, it didn't matter. He made his decision, and I was left to pick up the shattered pieces of my heart and my life. There were no goodbyes, no explanations, just the sound of the door closing behind him as he walked out. For years, I carried that pain with me, silently, quietly. I built a new life, a life without him, as best as I could. I moved on in ways I never imagined I could. But still, every year, when the anniversary of his departure rolled around, I'd find myself thinking about him. The man I had once loved with everything I had. I wondered what he was doing, where he was. Did he ever think about me? Did he ever regret his decision? And yet, life moves on. Time passes. I got busy with my own healing. I built a life without him, and somehow, I made it work. I learned to live without his presence. I went to therapy, I surrounded myself with friends who supported me, and I put my energy into something that gave me peace, raising my children. They were the family I always dreamed of, the family I had fought so hard to create. And they weren't just mine, they were ours. But tonight, everything was about to change. It was a night like any other, or so I thought. I had been invited to the Monteverde Education Foundation Gala, a high society event in Los Angeles that I had distanced myself from for years. The glam, the gossip, the sparkle of the lights, it had never been my scene after Gabriel left. But this night was different. I had something I needed to do. I walked into the Wilshire Grand Hotel with 4 incredible young people by my side, and immediately, the room went still. The usual chatter faded, and all eyes turned to us. There was something about the way we moved together, an unspoken unity between us. We had become a family in ways no one would ever understand. They weren't just my children, they were my strength. They were everything I had ever wanted, and I had raised them with love, care, and devotion. Each of them was unique, with their own dreams, personalities, and goals. But in that moment, they were more than just my children. They were my story, my testament to resilience, to moving forward when it felt like the world was against me. As we entered the ballroom, I felt a familiar weight on my shoulders. This was the kind of event where the glittering lights and the clinking of glasses might have once made me feel alive, but tonight, I wasn't here for the party. I was here for something else. Something that had been years in the making. And then, as we made our way through the crowd, I saw him. Gabriel. It felt like the air was sucked out of the room. He was standing there, in a tuxedo that looked like it was made just for him, his salt and pepper hair neatly styled, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. But when he saw me, when his gaze locked onto mine, everything else disappeared. I hadn't seen him in so long, and yet, in that moment, it felt like time hadn't passed at all. He looked the same, yet somehow different. There was a weight to his presence now that I hadn't seen before. A tension in his body that spoke volumes. And then he saw them. My children. His eyes flickered from one to the next, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Tyler, with his gray eyes just like Gabriel's, Elena, with her high cheekbones and presence that reminded me of him, Lucas, with his strong jaw and confident posture, Isla, with her crooked smile that was unmistakably his. It didn't take long for the truth to dawn on him. The confusion in his eyes turned to panic. His gaze bounced from one child to the next, and I saw his breath hitch in his chest as the realization hit him like a freight train. I held my breath, but I didn't flinch. I had prepared for this moment, even if I hadn't been sure when it would come. I could feel the tension in the air as Gabriel stepped toward us, his movements slow, deliberate, as if he was afraid of what he might find. But there was no stopping this now. The truth had been years in the making, and now it was finally coming to light. He stopped just a few feet away, his eyes scanning my children, his hands gripping his wineglass so tightly I thought it might shatter in his fingers. I knew him too well. I saw the tremble in his hand, the way his jaw tightened, the fight between the man who used to be so sure of everything and the man standing before the wreckage of his past. Samantha. His voice was rough, almost unrecognizable. The words were a whisper, barely hanging on. I didn't react. I didn't offer him the relief of tears or a response laced with bitterness. I had done that already. The woman standing before him was someone who had long since healed, someone who no longer needed him for validation. I met his gaze, steady and calm. "This is Tyler, Elena, Lucas, and Isla," I said, each name ringing out with an air of finality. "They're my children, Gabriel. Yours, too." He froze. His mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes darted between each face, trying to piece together a reality he had never known. A reality he had chosen to ignore. I watched him, and in that moment, I knew that everything he had built up over the years was crumbling. The wall he had carefully constructed around himself, the one that justified his abandonment, was falling apart. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Are they yours?" Gabriel finally asked, his voice shaking. I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own question, the weight of everything he had missed. "Yes," I said, holding his gaze with a calm that surprised even me. "They're mine, and they're yours." The words hung in the air, heavy with the truth he had never wanted to face. He stepped back as if the very air around him had turned toxic. His eyes flicked from Tyler's gray eyes to Elena's sharp cheekbones, to Lucas's strong jaw, and finally to Isla's crooked smile, the smile that was the last reminder of the man who had walked away so many years ago. He stood there, utterly still, trapped in a reality he hadn't known existed. He didn't speak, couldn't speak. And in that moment, I knew I had nothing left to say. The truth was in front of him, and there was no running from it. I didn't need to ask for an apology, and I didn't expect one. But I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there when he left me, regret. A deep, gnawing regret that nothing in this world could undo. The moment hung between us, fragile and fleeting. And then, with a final glance at the children he never knew he had, I turned and walked away. I wasn't walking away from him, not really. I was walking away from the past. From the pain he had left me with. And I was walking toward something better, a future with my children, a future where his absence didn't define me anymore. As we left, I could feel his gaze on my back. The regret, the confusion, the realization that he had missed out on so much. But the question lingered, was it too late for him to come back? I didn't know the answer. But tonight, I had faced the truth. And somehow, that was enough. The sound of the city buzzed beneath me as I stood on the balcony, looking out over Los Angeles. The lights of the city stretched out in every direction, a sea of glimmers and glows that once felt like my world. Years ago, I had been part of this glamorous, high society world, a place where status, wealth, and appearances ruled above all else. But that life? It felt like a different lifetime. One that had been ripped away from me the moment Gabriel walked out the door. I hadn't missed it. Not at first. The fancy galas, the champagne-soaked evenings, the endless chatter of the well-dressed elite, it all felt hollow after Gabriel left. For a long time, I kept my distance from it all, hiding away in my own world, a world where the only people who mattered were the ones I had created. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had been invited to the Monte Verde Education Foundation Gala, a major event in the city's high society calendar. It was the kind of event I used to attend with Gabriel by my side, our names whispered in the same breath as the powerhouses of LA. But now, it felt like I was stepping into a world that no longer had a place for me, a world that I'd long outgrown. And yet, I was there. I had a reason. A personal one. It wasn't about the glamour or the status. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about facing something long buried, about confronting the ghosts of my past that had somehow resurfaced. I turned away from the view and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection was steady, calm. The woman I had become was strong, resilient, and different from the woman I had been when Gabriel left. The years had shaped me into someone else, someone who no longer needed his approval, his love, or even his presence. I was about to face him. But this time, I wouldn't be the broken woman he left behind. I stepped into the car, the doors closing behind me with a soft thud. The car's engine hummed to life, and we made our way to the venue. As the city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to unfold. The moment we arrived at the gala, the atmosphere was electric. The rooftop of the Wilshire Grand Hotel was transformed into a fairy tale of sorts, tables draped in silks, candles casting soft glows on the faces of the city's elite, the faint strains of a piano drifting through the night air. It was the kind of scene that once made my heart race with excitement. Now, it felt surreal. A little too perfect. I wasn't here for the glitz. I wasn't here for the people. I was here for something else entirely. Something that had been brewing for years. And then, as we entered the ballroom, I felt it. The sudden shift in the air. The subtle hush that fell over the crowd. Eyes turned in our direction. It wasn't just the four young people by my side. It was the energy between us, a kind of magnetic pull that seemed to draw the attention of everyone in the room. There was no mistaking it. We were a family. And we weren't here to be seen. We were here to confront the past. The four of them moved with grace, their personalities each distinct yet undeniably in sync with one another. Tyler, the quiet one, always a step ahead in his mind, with his dark, stormy eyes that reflected a depth beyond his years. Elena, poised and elegant, a true artist in every sense of the word, her beauty both striking and fierce. Lucas, the strong and silent type, his sharp jawline a testament to the determination and tenacity that defined him. And Isla, my wild child, with a crooked smile that could melt anyone's heart and a fire that refused to be tamed. As we crossed the floor, I felt the eyes on us. They were intrigued, curious, and a little too eager to know who we were. But I didn't care. Not anymore. I knew why we were here, and that was all that mattered. And then I saw him. Gabriel. The moment my eyes locked on his, the world seemed to stop spinning. I hadn't seen him in so long. So many years had passed since that fateful day when he walked out, never looking back. Yet there he stood, right in front of me, as if time had reversed itself. He looked almost the same, his hair a bit grayer, his face more defined, his tuxedo fitting him perfectly. But there was something different about him now. Something broken in his eyes. Something that I didn't recognize. His gaze met mine, and I felt a chill run through me. It was as if everything I had built up over the years was crumbling in that instant. The man who once promised me forever now stood there, a stranger in my world. But I didn't look away. I stood my ground, my heart steady, my resolve even stronger. He saw me. But then, his eyes drifted past me, toward the children. His gaze flickered over them, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand. How could he? How could he have known the truth when he never stayed long enough to see it? Tyler. Elena. Lucas. Isla. Each of them unmistakably his. Each of them carrying a part of him. His eyes. His smile. His features. They were living proof of the life he had walked away from, of the family he had abandoned without a second thought. It was as if Gabriel couldn't breathe. He took a step back, his hand trembling around the wineglass in his hand. His eyes darted between each child, each face that mirrored his own, until they locked with mine. His voice came out in a rasp. "Samantha." The years seemed to vanish in that moment, and I was right back to where I had been 17 years ago. The broken woman who had begged for him to stay. The woman who had tried to understand, to make sense of his departure, to forgive him. But I wasn't her anymore. I met his gaze, steady and calm. "This is Tyler, Elena, Lucas, and Isla." Each name felt like a declaration, a truth that could no longer be denied. "They're my children. And they're yours." For a long moment, Gabriel didn't speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The truth was too much for him to process. The reality of what he had missed, what he had chosen not to see, was too overwhelming. But I wasn't here to make it easy for him. "They're yours, Gabriel," I repeated, each word a weight he couldn't escape. And that's when it hit him. The panic. The shock. The realization that the children he had never known existed were standing right in front of him, a living, breathing reminder of everything he had walked away from. His face twisted with disbelief, and I saw the old arrogance crumble. He staggered back, as if the very truth of it was too much to bear. His mind was racing, trying to piece together a past that didn't make sense anymore. How could it? He had left. He had chosen a future without us. "Are they really?" Gabriel whispered, his voice thick with confusion. I stood tall, unflinching. "Yes," I said again. "They're yours." It was in that moment, when the shock finally began to settle in, that I realized this wasn't just a reunion. This was a reckoning. Gabriel had to face the truth he had spent years running from, the truth that his children were here, that they existed, and that he had missed it all. And that was just the beginning. The room was quiet, too quiet, as Gabriel's eyes darted from one child to the next. I could see the disbelief clouding his expression, as though the truth was too much for him to process. It wasn't just confusion on his face, it was fear. Fear of the truth he had been running from all these years. Fear of the life he had walked away from, the children he never knew existed. Gabriel stood there, frozen, as if the world around him had paused in this single, suffocating moment. His eyes lingered on Tyler first, Tyler, who stood so composed and confident, his gray eyes piercing through the years of separation. Tyler's eyes were the same as his, but Gabriel wasn't ready to face it. He looked away quickly, as if the evidence was too hard to accept. Next, his gaze moved to Elena. Elena, with her striking features, high cheekbones, and a presence that could fill a room without even trying. Elena was the very image of me, but with something unmistakably him in her. The sharpness in her eyes. The way she carried herself. Gabriel's gaze faltered again, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. Then there was Lucas, the quiet one, with his sharp jaw and the stillness about him that made him appear wise beyond his years. He met Gabriel's gaze without hesitation, his expression unreadable but heavy with something I couldn't quite place. Gabriel faltered once more, his face twisting as though he was struggling to reconcile the past with what was standing in front of him. And finally, Isla, my youngest. The one with the crooked smile, the one who had always reminded me so much of him. The one who had that same spark, that same defiant fire that used to be his. Her smile caught him off guard, and for a moment, I saw it, the recognition. That's when it hit him. That's when the realization started to flood his mind, wave after wave. He had known all along, in some part of him, that this moment was inevitable. But it wasn't until now, until he stood in front of these four, staring into their faces, that he finally understood the truth. The truth he had rejected for so long. These children, these remarkable, beautiful souls, were his. Gabriel took a shaky breath, his hand gripping his wineglass so tightly I was sure it would crack. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready for the bombshell that was about to drop on him. I saw the panic in his eyes as he finally stumbled forward, taking tentative steps, his eyes locked onto the faces of my children. His breath was shallow now, his composure slipping. "Are they?" Gabriel's voice cracked as he spoke, his words trailing off, unable to form the full question. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to ask. He wasn't sure if he was ready to hear the answer. But I saw it in his eyes, the desperate need for confirmation. "They're yours, Gabriel," I said, my voice steady, despite the chaos swirling around inside me. There it was, the moment I had prepared for, the moment that would change everything. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was calm. Calm because I had long accepted the fact that Gabriel's departure had been his choice, and I couldn't change that. But what I could do was stand here, with my children, and make him face the truth. "They're your children," I said again, this time more firmly. "Tyler, Elena, Lucas, and Isla. They're all yours." The words were simple, direct, but they carried the weight of years of grief, loss, and healing. Gabriel stepped back, his face pale, his eyes wild with disbelief. His gaze shifted between each child, lingering on them for a beat longer than necessary, as if he was searching for some sign that could undo everything that had just been revealed. But there was no sign. No mistake. There was no denying it anymore. The man who had left me so many years ago, believing I couldn't have children, believing our future together was impossible, was now standing in front of the children he never knew he had. And the more he looked at them, the more his face contorted in confusion. Each of them carried a part of him, a part he had turned his back on. They were his children, his flesh and blood, and he could no longer hide from it. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. I saw the struggle in his eyes, the mental gymnastics he was performing, trying to reconcile this new reality with the story he had told himself for so many years. But you," Gabriel's voice faltered. "You thought I couldn't have children," I interrupted, finishing the sentence for him. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. He had believed it. He had left me because of it. The pain that had been buried deep inside me for years began to surface, but I held it back. There was no room for it right now. Not with Gabriel standing there, looking like he was about to collapse under the weight of everything he had just learned. "Yeah," I continued, keeping my tone even. "We both thought that. But we were wrong." Gabriel's face went ashen, and for a moment, I thought he might fall to his knees. The shock, the horror, the regret, it was all written on his face. But he couldn't escape it now. He couldn't escape the truth, no matter how much he wanted to. I watched as he took a shaky step back, his hand gripping the wineglass so tightly I thought it might shatter. The room was still, the only sound the faint murmur of other guests in the background, oblivious to the drama unfolding before them. I wasn't concerned with anyone else. This was our moment. Our reckoning. Gabriel stood there for what felt like an eternity, his eyes searching for something, anything, that might explain what was happening. But there was nothing. No excuses. No explanations. Just the 4 children in front of him, each one a living testament to the life he had walked away from. He opened his mouth again, but this time, his voice was barely a whisper. "They're really mine?" I nodded, my eyes unwavering. "Yes, Gabriel. They're yours." There it was. The truth, raw and undeniable, hanging in the air between us. And as Gabriel's gaze fell on each of them, as he took an undeniable likeness in their features, I saw the moment it all clicked for him. His eyes widened as the realization settled in. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't some cruel trick. These children, these 4 incredible kids, were his. They were a part of him, in ways he couldn't deny, even if he wanted to. Gabriel stumbled back, his face draining of color. He looked at Tyler first, his pale gray eyes staring back at him like a reflection in a mirror. Then to Elena, her sharp cheekbones and deep eyes mirroring my own, but with something undeniably him in her. He moved next to Lucas, whose strong jawline and quiet strength mirrored him in more ways than one. Finally, his gaze landed on Isla, the child who had always been the wild card, the one with the crooked smile that was all him. Gabriel took a step back, as if the room itself was closing in on him. I could see it in his face, the guilt, the regret, the realization that he had missed so much. So many moments. So many years. And now, he was here, standing in front of them, a stranger to the very children he had fathered. For a long moment, he was silent. The noise of the ballroom faded away as we stood there, locked in this unspoken understanding. He couldn't speak. Couldn't move. And I knew that, deep down, he was battling something he would never be able to undo. Finally, he whispered again, almost to himself, "They're really mine?" I gave him one last nod. "Yes," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the silence. "They're yours. And now you know the truth." The air between us was thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Gabriel's eyes shifted to the children one more time before he took a slow step back, as if trying to absorb everything that had just hit him. His body seemed to sag under the pressure, his face pale, his hands still gripping the wineglass for dear life. But it was too late for him to run. Too late for him to hide from what he had ignored for so long. The truth was in front of him. And there was nothing he could do to change it now. The room was electric, yet still, as though the universe itself had paused to watch. In the midst of the elegant gala, where laughter and polite chatter once filled the air, there stood Gabriel, his world now shattered, his mind whirling with confusion, regret, and disbelief. He had spent the last 17 years living in a world where his decisions were final, where he had built walls around his choices, convinced that he had made the right one by leaving me behind. But now, as the truth hung in the air, thick and undeniable, I knew there was no way out for him. There was no running. No hiding. His gaze was fixed on me, and I could see it, his internal battle, his fight against the truth he had refused to acknowledge for so long. The man who had once stood strong, certain of everything in his life, now seemed fragile, unsure, and, strangely, lost. I had seen him like this before, back when we were together, but never in this way. Never with so much at stake. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words faltered, like he couldn't find the right ones. He had always been so certain, so in control, but now, here he was, facing something that shattered everything he thought he knew. The truth about his children. His family. Are they really mine? Gabriel's voice was barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to ignore, impossible to deny. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a question I had waited years to hear, but not in this way. Not with the weight of so much regret behind it. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, the confusion in his eyes sharper than I had ever seen. But it wasn't just the pain of not knowing his children. No, it was something deeper, something that cut to the core of who he was as a man. It was the regret of walking away from them. Of walking away from me. Of leaving us all behind because he couldn't handle the uncertainty of a future he hadn't even tried to understand. I stood there, staring at him, my breath steady and calm. Inside, though, a storm raged. It raged with all the years of anger, of hurt, of bitterness that I had buried deep within me. The woman I had become in his absence, strong, independent, resilient, wasn't going to flinch now. I wasn't going to let him off easy, not this time. "Yes," I said, my voice firm, unshakable. "They are yours, Gabriel. And they're mine." The words left my lips with the kind of finality that made the room feel smaller, quieter. He stepped back, as if struck by an invisible force. His breath caught, and I saw it, a flicker of recognition. Not just of their faces, of the way they mirrored him, but the recognition of what he had lost. What he had thrown away. All those years of thinking he had made the right choice by walking away from us, from me, and now, standing here, he had to face the reality that he was wrong. The decision he had made had shattered everything, his future, his family, and his peace of mind. I watched as Gabriel's eyes darted from one child to the next, his gaze moving between them as though he was trying to piece together the fragments of a life he never knew existed. Tyler. Elena. Lucas. Isla. Each one of them stood tall, unflinching, while Gabriel's legs seemed to buckle under the weight of his realization. Tyler, with his piercing gray eyes, the very same ones that Gabriel had once claimed for himself, stood silently, his arms crossed. He didn't move, didn't flinch. His face was unreadable, yet there was something about his calmness that spoke volumes. He wasn't here to make this easy for Gabriel. He wasn't here to offer forgiveness or answers. He was here to make Gabriel face the consequences of his actions. Elena, with her deep, soulful eyes and a quiet strength that reminded me so much of myself, stood by Tyler. She was still, but there was a fire behind her gaze. I knew her better than anyone, and I could see it in her, her own version of the pain I had carried all these years. She wasn't angry, no. But there was something simmering beneath the surface, something she wasn't ready to express. Maybe because she knew this moment was bigger than any words. Lucas, ever the skeptic, eyed Gabriel with caution. His arms were crossed, his face set in that all too familiar mask of distrust. But there was something else in his eyes, too. The glimmer of hope, perhaps, that maybe, just maybe, this man, this stranger, wasn't as lost as he seemed. And Isla, the one who had always been the most like Gabriel, with that crooked smile and fire in her spirit. She stood quietly, watching him with a look of curiosity, of disbelief. I could see the question in her eyes. The one she had asked herself for so long. Who is this man? The one who walked away. The one who never even tried. Gabriel's eyes traveled over them all, one by one. I could see the moment it clicked. I could see the moment when he realized these weren't just strangers. These were his children. Flesh and blood. The people he had left behind. His eyes softened, but only for a second, before the walls came crashing down again. His hand trembled as it reached for his wine glass, the glass now a lifeline, something to hold onto in the midst of the storm brewing inside him. Gabriel began, but his voice cracked. He took a deep breath, as if trying to steady himself, but I saw it. I saw the man who had left me so many years ago, standing before me now, with nothing but guilt and regret in his eyes. The truth was too much. It was too overwhelming for him. The life he had walked away from was right in front of him, and he didn't know what to do with it. He didn't know how to fix it. How could he? 17 years had passed. There were no take-backs, no do-overs. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a decision he had made, and now he had to live with it. Are they really mine? Gabriel's voice was softer now, almost as if he was pleading. Pleading for something he knew he could never have again. Pleading for a chance to undo the impossible. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I stood tall, steady, unwavering. The woman I had become was someone who didn't need his apology. Didn't need his remorse. What I needed, and what my children needed, was for him to finally face the reality of what he had done. Yes, I repeated, my voice calm but firm. They are yours. Gabriel's face twisted in pain. I could see the battle raging inside him. This was the moment when everything would change. This was the moment when the truth would either destroy him or set him free. For the first time, I saw him crack. The man who had once been so strong, so certain of his choices, was now broken. I watched as he took a slow step back, his eyes scanning the faces of my children, the faces he had missed, the faces he had never seen grow up. And then, he did something I didn't expect. He dropped his wine glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound sharp and final. Gabriel didn't seem to notice. His eyes were locked on Tyler, the young man who resembled him so closely. The resemblance was undeniable, but what struck me more than anything was the way Tyler looked back at him. It wasn't with anger. It wasn't with hatred. It was with something far more cutting. It was the look of a man who had been robbed of his past. A man who had every right to be angry but was simply too tired to fight. Gabriel's eyes flicked to Elena next, and then to Lucas, and finally to Isla. His face softened, but there was no warmth in it. Only regret. Regret that he had never been there. Regret that he had let fear guide his decisions instead of love. And as the room watched in silence, I realized that for the first time in all these years, Gabriel had finally seen the truth. The truth about the family he had left behind. The family he had abandoned. And he was never going to be the same again. Gabriel took a deep breath, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't say anything. I didn't need to." But in that moment, as Gabriel stood there, broken and humbled, I realized that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for him. Not for my children. Not for me. But for him. The moment we turned away from Gabriel, it felt like the room exhaled. The air, which had been thick with tension, suddenly felt lighter, as though the very ground beneath us had shifted. Samantha walked ahead, her steps measured, each one a quiet defiance to the pain that had haunted her for so long. Her eyes never left the exit. Her heart, it seemed, had already left the room, and now, she was simply walking toward a future that no longer included Gabriel. But Gabriel, he remained. The man who had once been her world, the man who had promised her forever, was now standing there, rooted to the floor, in a sea of regret that he couldn't swim out of. His eyes followed us, but there was nothing left he could do. We were leaving, walking away from him in more ways than one. As I followed Samantha, I glanced back one last time. Gabriel hadn't moved. His body was still, his posture stiff, like a man who had just been hit by a tidal wave of truth and was too dazed to react. His eyes were fixed on us, but there was no longer any hope of catching up. No more running after us. No more pretending. He had tried to hide from the truth for so long, but now, it was impossible to deny. And as I walked alongside my siblings, I couldn't help but feel something shift inside me, a feeling that I had been missing for so long. Closure. The truth had been laid bare. It was like peeling back the layers of a long-forgotten wound, and while the scar remained, it no longer hurt. We had walked through it together. Samantha had led us through a path of painful realizations, and though Gabriel was left standing there in his regret, we had already moved on. We didn't look back again. There was nothing more to say. The door to our past had been closed with quiet finality, and as the elevator doors slid shut behind us, the noise from the gala faded into the distance. Gabriel was still standing there, but he was no longer a part of our story. Not today. The ride home was silent at first. The kind of silence that fills a room with more meaning than words ever could. It was the kind of silence that speaks volumes, volumes of what was said, of what was unsaid, of what was lost and what was finally found. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts, processing everything that had just happened. And then, it was Isla who broke the silence. "Mom," she said softly, "will you ever tell him everything?" Her question hung in the air for a moment, and I could feel my chest tighten. It was a question that had been lingering between us since we left the ballroom, one that had been too big to ask before, but now it seemed like the right moment to say it aloud. I looked at her, meeting her steady gaze in the rearview mirror. My heart swelled, a strange mixture of pride and sadness taking over. Isla had always been the one to ask the tough questions, the ones that nobody else wanted to ask. She had always been the one to face the hard truths head-on, never shying away from the things that others were too afraid to confront. "No, Isla," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I don't think I'll tell him everything. At least not yet." There was a pause, and then Tyler spoke, his voice low but clear. "He doesn't deserve to know, does he?" I didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Did Gabriel deserve to know everything? The answer, in many ways, was no. He didn't deserve to know the details of how I had fought for us, how I had fought for our family, all these years. He didn't deserve to know how I had struggled, how I had built something beautiful in the absence of his love. But did that mean I would never tell him? Did that mean I would never let him in on the full truth of why I had chosen to raise them alone? Why I had never once considered going back to him? The truth was complicated. Gabriel had left, and I had survived. But the truth about why he left, and why it was never just about me not being able to have children, was a story I hadn't told anyone. Not even my children. But maybe one day, when the time was right, when they were ready, I would share that part of the story. But not now. Not yet. I don't know, I finally said, glancing back at them. But I do know this, it doesn't matter anymore. We're okay. We're stronger than we were before. We're a family. And that was the truth. The final truth. The truth that mattered. We were okay. And that was something Gabriel would never understand, at least, not now. Gabriel, meanwhile, stood alone in the middle of the grand ballroom, his mind whirling with 1,000 unanswered questions. He had been left behind once, but this time, it wasn't just because of his decision to walk away from me. It was because he had failed to see what was right in front of him, the life that he had created and abandoned. He had failed to realize that the children he never knew existed were the very children who could have been the reason for his redemption. But redemption was a long road, and it wasn't one he could walk alone. In the days that followed, Gabriel couldn't escape the truth that had been forced upon him. Everywhere he went, every conversation he had, every thought he tried to push away, it kept circling back to the same undeniable reality. The children he had rejected were now grown, vibrant, full of life, and a living testament to what he had walked away from. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. Gabriel's life, in the weeks after the gala, was spent in a haze of introspection. He had always been a man of action, of decisiveness, but now, he found himself paralyzed by the weight of his regrets. His mind kept replaying the moment in the ballroom when the truth had been laid out in front of him, when the faces of his children had mirrored his own in a way he could never deny. One night, long after the gala had ended, Gabriel found himself in front of his desk, staring at the photos of his children that he had found scattered across his desk, a desk that had once been a symbol of his success and control. Now, it felt hollow. It felt empty. He sat in silence, unable to look away from the photos. The faces of his children. The faces of the people he had abandoned. And as the hours ticked by, as the weight of his past continued to press down on him, Gabriel knew what he had to do. He had to take responsibility. The next few weeks were filled with a kind of quiet perseverance on Gabriel's part. He didn't know where to begin, didn't know what to say, but he knew one thing: he couldn't run anymore. He had tried that for years. He had closed the door on the family he never knew he wanted, and now, it was time to face what he had missed. It was on a cool morning, a few weeks after the gala, when Gabriel stood outside my house again. His heart was pounding in his chest, and this time, it wasn't out of fear of rejection. It was because he was ready to take the first step toward redemption. He knocked gently on the door, unsure of what to expect. He wasn't expecting forgiveness, but he was ready to listen. He was ready to see the children, ready to take responsibility for the past he had so easily discarded. When the door opened, there she was, Samantha. Strong. Unyielding. And yet, there was something different in her eyes. Something softer. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the recognition that, even now, there was still time. "I'm here to talk," Gabriel said softly. "If you'll let me." Samantha didn't immediately respond, but she stepped aside, letting him in. There were no words exchanged at first. No expectations. Just a quiet understanding. Gabriel was here, and for the first time, he was ready to face the truth, not just of his past, but of what he wanted his future to be. And that was a start. A small one, but it was enough. As he walked into the living room, his eyes found the faces of his children again. This time, there was no shock. No denial. Just a quiet acceptance. They weren't ready to forgive him. They weren't ready to embrace him as the father they had never known. But Gabriel didn't expect them to. He knew that was a journey that would take time. But for the first time, Gabriel was willing to take that journey. He was willing to be there, not as the man who had abandoned them, but as the man who had finally come home. And Samantha, she watched quietly, standing on the edge, letting her children decide what they needed. She had already healed. She had already built a life that didn't depend on Gabriel, but now, she knew, sometimes, redemption comes when you least expect it. And sometimes, it's enough to just let it begin.
That's it for today's story on Life Reflections. I'd love to hear your take. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or a story of your own. If you enjoyed this, give a like and subscribe to keep the reflections coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.